Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to introduce The Color Out of Space, one of Lovecraft's seminal works that helped to define his later career, or the later period in his career that I discussed in the introductory video on Lovecraft himself. The Color Out of Space is considered to be one of Lovecraft's greatest works, and the author himself believed it to be the perfect instantiation, or at least as close as he ever came to instantiating his philosophy of cosmicism in a particular work. This story fuses horror or terror literature with science fiction. And characteristic of Lovecraft's later works, we have an overturning or a supplementation of natural laws with those greater unknown natural laws that exist beyond our pitiful, paltry little sphere of the known, the Earth. So, how we think the universe operates, the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, the laws of light, and the like, all these things appear to be functioning, but they're overturned or they're supplemented with greater natural laws that reveal to us that we don't actually understand the way in which the universe actually truly works or the real laws that govern its operation. The color of space itself is an instantiation of cosmicism. Most of Lovecraft's later creatures, like Cthulhu, like Yog-Sothoth, like the color out of space itself, are all reflections of the true nature of the universe. The nature of the universe is something that is fundamentally alien, inhospitable, and utterly incomprehensible based on our feeble, limited minds and imaginations. Human beings lack the actual ability on a biological, genetic, innate level to ever understand the true function of the universe, the true operation of the universe. And so, the color out of space itself as a creature and the way in which it impacts our little paltry sphere of the known that it invades from outside, this fantastical cosmic force penetrating into our world, is meant to represent the much grander and incomprehensible cosmos that transcends anything that we know. And it is Lovecraft's cosmicism in miniature. It has no human motivations. It's not good or evil. It's utterly outside our scope of knowledge and our understandings of nature. And as an example of that, we have the concluding quotation. So if we take a look at the very end of the story, when the narrator is discussing the color out of space after it has departed, and perhaps left behind one small gestational piece of itself that has been now covered over with the waters. The narrator says, "What it is, only God knows. In terms of matter, I suppose the thing Ami described would be called a gas, but this gas obeyed laws that are not of our cosmos." Right? I suppose that it might be called a gas in terms of how it behaved, but this gas didn't obey the laws of nature as we understand them. So in the end, it wasn't really a gas at all. I'm describing it as a gas by analogy only. It behaved like a gas, but it wasn't, because the laws that govern pressure and volume and the way in which gases respond to changes in these things didn't actually govern how the color operated. And then the narrator launches into this extensive poeticization, using rarefied and refined language to try to gesture vaguely towards this thing that can't be captured with objective scientific rationalism, because it doesn't obey the laws of nature as we understand them, or even any laws of nature that we could possibly hope to understand. This was no fruit of such worlds and suns as shines on the telescopes and photographic plates of our observatories. This was no breath from the skies whose motions and dimensions our astronomers measure, or deem too vast to measure. So not only does it transcend our ability to measure, it even transcends our ability to conceptualize. Right? You might have heard that there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. There are things, for instance, when we understood that atoms existed and that they formed the basis of matter, there were competing theories as to the nature of those atoms. Was the plum pudding model of the structure of an atom correct? So was an atom like a jelly-like substance with a negative charge that was embedded with positive charges inside of it? Or was this sort of almost solar system-like analog of the atom as we understand it, with its electron shells and the like? Is that how an atom actually looks? Like, we know that we didn't know what the atom looked like. Here, We're grappling with something that is beyond all the systematized understandings of nature and the cosmos of astronomy and astrophysics. It is not a breath from the sky whose motions and dimensions our astronomers measure. So it's outside of the scope of measurement, but it's even beyond the scope of something that could ever conceivably be measurable according to the laws of science, according to the laws of astronomy, that we actually have access to and that we can understand. It was just a color out of space, a frightful messenger from unformed realms of infinity beyond all nature as we know it, from realms whose mere existence stuns the brain and numbs us with black extracosmic gulfs that it throws open before our frenzied eyes. So it is a messenger of chaos. It descends from chaos, from insanity, from madness, from that which we cannot understand, and it enters into our world, bringing with it the message of that reality, casting down all the systems that we use to understand the world and revealing their triviality, revealing their artificiality, the reality that we have constructed them. Now, the color out of space itself is, like I said, an instantiation and embodiment of cosmicism. As we read through the story, we see that the color out of space, as Lovecraft says, reflects his philosophy that no one should believe that such things as organic life, good and evil, love and hate, and all such local attributes of a negligible and temporary race called mankind have any existence at all. In other words, the universe out there is fundamentally alien and hostile. Everything that we believe in, everything that we value on this earth is transient. It all falls away, it all dies away. There's no lasting value or significance to anything that we believe, and no necessary application of those things in the universe beyond us. That universe is cold, uncaring, and indifferent. It's fundamentally alien. So things like organic life, good and evil, what we believe to be good and evil, are not objective at all. They're entirely subjective constructs that we essentially build for ourselves in order to help us to get through the long dark night of our civilizations and our species' existence. All local attributes of a negligible and temporary race are obliterated in the face of cosmic indifference. The color out of space is a kind of reflection of that reality. It has no real comprehensible human motivations. It's not evil, like the universe is not evil. It's just, it appears so based on our personal, subjective, fallible understanding of how it operates. Mere contact with this force from outside destroys us, just as mere contact with the reality that nothing that we believe, nothing that we hold as true, nothing that we hold as valuable is actually so, would drive us mad. It is a sentient color by analogy only. So he says, I suppose this thing is a color, but it's not a color that's on the electromagnetic spectrum. It looks like a color, it acts like a color, but it's a living sapient color. It's not in the visible spectrum, so we shouldn't be able to see it, and yet we can. So there's this confused melange of incongruous descriptions and attributes that illustrate to us that what we believe about the universe and how it's supposed to function are really being overturned. It doesn't fit into how we categorize and understand the world. It doesn't fit into any of our systems. It is quite literally off any of the spectrums that we use to understand the universe. Now, to establish the nature of this creature as something that seems to be beyond any of our systems of categorization and that overturns fundamentally our systems of categorization because it's beyond our understanding, Lovecraft uses a motif of opposition. In other words, he's setting up a series of contradictory attributes for this character or for this creature, the color out of space. The color is a color that is visible, and yet it's not on the electromagnetic spectrum in terms of the visual spectrum or the visible spectrum. These incongruous attributes, or the incongruity between its attributes and its systems of, or its way in which it fits or fails to fit into our systems of categorization, and the visible manifest presence of this thing, again, demonstrates the impossibility of its existence. The color is described as being both a messenger and a message. It is both sign and symbol, the thing that is communicating a message, right? The one that is transmitting the message, but also the message in itself. It is against nature, opposed to nature, but it's also beyond all nature. So Lovecraft uses these carefully embedded descriptions and references inside the story to illustrate the incongruity of its nature and the impossibility of fitting it into any of our systems of categorization. It is a visitor from those realms beyond our understanding, but something of it remains behind. Even though it's a visitor, it has departed, and yet something remains behind. And finally, in that climactic moment, when we encounter Amy Pierce, and he describes the Gardner family and what has happened to them. Thaddeus Gardner says that the color is cold and wet, and yet it burns. So, what we have here is an ontological violation. Ontology is basically the philosophy that pertains to categorization. So, if I was to say, well, this is what makes a human being, and these are the qualities or attributes that make an animal, I have just acted or I have just used ontology. I'm engaged in an ontological act in the sense that I am separating out a category, man, and a category, animal, and submitting to you what makes or defines those categories. Here, we're presented with innumerable different kinds of categories. And yet, through very carefully modulated and constructed descriptions across the story, Lovecraft illustrates that these ontological distinctions, right, cold and wet versus hot, for instance, are actually part of a spectrum and that the color exists even outside that spectrum. The reversal of these defining attributes signals a defiance of norms and rationality. The scientists, as they examine the color and try to explore its underlying nature, they try to fit the color onto a series of different spectra, visual spectra, and the like. They run various experiments on its nature, on its material, the material of the asteroid itself. And yet, nothing that they do actually helps them to place it or categorize it. It only enhances or it exacerbates the mystery with which they're presented. That means that our process of engaging in rational inquiry, the application of reason to this unknown thing that represents the unknown universe, in the end only frustrates us and drives us, well, to madness because we can't grapple with it. We can't understand it. Logic and human natural laws, those laws of nature as we understand them in this paltry little world, this paltry little sphere of the known, are always overturned. Everything in this story, as we progress, logic, the laws of nature, human minds, human bodies, everything is deteriorating and degenerating. The major motif of opposition in this story fits into another larger motif of degeneration. We have psychological degeneration, physical degeneration. We also have this incongruity between external signifiers and internal reality. Think to the fruit, right? The fruit that on the Gardner farm grows large and luscious and ripe, and yet it's diseased and hideous on the inside. So again, we have this motif of opposition, essentially the overturning of expectations as everything inside the story, logic, language, rationality, human bodies, human minds, with Gardner's wife, all of them break down and disintegrate. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about the evolution of these themes and these motifs across the story. And in our interactive class, we're going to take a look at some of the specific poetic and linguistic or literary techniques that Lovecraft uses, and to essentially develop an idea about disintegration or degeneration in the context of this story.